Hello, welcome to Random Witterings podcast with Michelle.
And Charlie, and we're going to talk about celebrating our neurodivergence.
In episode 2, we talk about going through our kids' diagnosis and then ours.
So, when was your realization, actually, your moment when you went, actually, maybe I should think about getting diagnosed? What was your lightning moment, your lightning bolt?
It was probably a gradual realization, actually. But my 3 children were diagnosed. Interestingly, my middle child was diagnosed at 6. And then my eldest child was looking over my shoulder as we were filling in all these forms and doing all these tests and saying, well, I do that and I feel like that. And some of these things I didn't even know they felt like. And that was weird. And they were 13.
Mm.
And then my youngest child, we knew what to look for. And they were very, the first 2 were diagnosed technically Asperger's, although I know that they're getting rid of that term now. But my third child was diagnosed as autistic because they had speech problems and they had not learning difficulties, but more problems, and so they stopped talking when they were 3, going to preschool. So knew then that this was very much more clear. So interestingly, 6-year-old got diagnosed first, then the 13-year-old and the 3-year-old the next year. And so through all of that, I mean, the 13-year-old, I thought, well, you're just like me. So I knew that they were quirky and eccentric, but their school report was like my school report. So I thought, oh, cool, you're just like me. And it's often when, like you said, like when things get really difficult, like relationship problems or school exams, moving house, stressful situations can really put pressure on you, and all that energy that you're putting into masking and fitting in, which girls tend to do really, really well, or they have a need to do more than boys generally, not always. But yeah, so you're putting all of your batteries into masking, and you've got no batteries left for the horrible things that are happening or the changing things that are happening in life. So you suddenly start to suffer, and some of your um you know you start to struggle. So after all of that, I started a Facebook group for carers, really, and anyone, just so I could find out more about it. But I did it online because I was working, I couldn't go out and go to all these day groups, so I did it online. So through that, through listening to that, and then I thought, yeah, I probably am on a spectrum myself. So how
Yeah.
about you?
Yeah, so similarly, with my eldest, because his birthday is the very end of August, they were just like, he's a boy, he's young, that's why he can't concentrate, that's why he can't pick up a pencil, that's why he doesn't want to read, that's why he doesn't write. And I'm like, there's something more here. In year 6, so he was 11, he started having very bad anxieties and not wanting to go to school. And then in secondary school, again, I think when you hit teenage years, I think that the puberty thing kind of makes a difference. By this stage, I was fairly convinced that maybe there was some ADHD going on, because he is really kind of all over the place. He's not at all organized, and he just wasn't getting the social stuff. And then we noticed my daughter she was a great masker. But I suddenly realized that she was socially awkward. We would go to parents' evening, and they'd say, "Oh, it'd be great if she just speak up." What? No, she never says anything at school. This diva we had at home that used to slam doors and fly around the house and, shout and rant and rave. And, even now, I think her school would be amazed if they could see her twerking while she's cooking dinner, kind of thing, because she doesn't do that at school. She's very self-conscious. Super, super clever, and she doesn't get challenged at school, but because she wasn't saying anything, they didn't realise how bright she was. But what I didn't realise is the reason she was managing to coast at school, because she's spending 90% of the time looking out the window and not focusing, but she could do in 10% of the time what everybody else was doing in the entire lesson.
Yeah.
So she
Yeah.
was getting away with it at school, but obviously as she's got nearer to GCSEs and the work's got harder, she can't, and it's now becoming more obvious,
Yeah.
the ADHD side. We're like, right, actually, when it came to GCSEs, I was really worried that my son was going to start falling apart and falling, and it could have an effect. So we started investigating, getting a diagnosis, but of course it was COVID. So my parents, in the end, bless them, very generously paid to let them go privately. So because we didn't really want to wait any longer. And when we looked at the details going privately, you might as well ask them to diagnose you ADHD and autism, because the costing was like not much more. So I was expecting to have the eldest ADHD and the youngest, my daughter, autistic.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, they both come back autistic and ADHD. So when their diagnoses came through and I got their reports and I read them, I'm like, oh, but I just thought they were like me, like you.
Yeah.
Oh.
So when I did go for it, I sort of started connecting to Facebook groups of mothers, people like me, not kids, people like me. And people would say, "Oh my God, I did this thing. Oh, I'm so embarrassed." And I'd be like, "Oh, these are my people." I found my tribe. And that was when I was 42. So I got diagnosed at 42.
But so I can actually beat you on the diagnosis bingo, because I was 48 when I got my diagnosis. After my kids, I had my period of depression, and I think that was to do with actually becoming a mum. And being autistic is really hard, because it was like I looked at them and I fell in love, and I didn't, and I was like, what's wrong with me? And I spent 3 years going, what's wrong with me? So it just took me a bit longer. I thought that it would be like the movies when I had my kids, and there wasn't that instant, oh wow, I could die for this person. I mean, I would, obviously I would, but I just didn't get that emotional connection, that physical feeling immediately. No wonder I was depressed. With COVID, I suffered majorly from anxiety, and I was like, and I'd had been diagnosed with depression, and it was this time I just thought they are diagnosing symptoms, not the cause.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And
that's a
so,
particular stress for women that
yeah,
tend to get diagnosed with other things.
yeah. So anxiety, I was diagnosed with depression. Did some cognitive therapy. So I actually again did a private. We did a private diagnosis for me because we'd saved on the kids, and I was expecting ADHD. I wasn't expecting autism for me. I thought it was very similar to my son.
Yeah.
So quite surprised that I got both. But then when I read through it, it made complete and utter sense.
My son got diagnosed with they asked if he could go for a diagnosis of ADHD when he got stuck in a chair from fidgeting during his autism diagnosis. Said we think we should put him forward for that as well. But actually
So
that was a lot to do with his age, because he got diagnosed with attention deficit disorder, inactive subtype, which is ADD, which means you're not normally hyperactive, but you struggle to concentrate. And it's the same, you take the
so
same kind of medications and stuff, but I think outwardly to other people, they don't see it so much.
I think as well, with one thing I've learned about ADHD is that ADHD often comes out in women as chattiness. That's our constant activity, and I don't shut up.
First I was like, yeah, cool, relieved, brilliant, I know what's going on. Then I got a little bit angry, because it was like, well, if I'd have known that when I was a teenager, I wouldn't have struggled half so hard.
Yeah,
So I got a little bit angry. It's a bit like watching a movie with a twist and then rewatching your life knowing what that twist was. Like
yeah,
rewatching that movie and knowing all of those signs, and
all the
it's like,
signs.
yeah,
And like you, I read it, went, yes, this makes so much sense. And then I got really angry that nobody noticed, but I
yeah,
understood why. I was never angry at my parents.
yeah,
I was just angry at society for being a bit rubbish, and felt almost
yeah,
like it was a bit victim blaming. Oh, girls are hard to diagnose because they can mask.
yeah,
Well, you need to work out how to diagnose girls then, right?
yeah,
Um, because we're here and
yeah,
we're really getting screwed up along the way
a lot,
emotionally.
yeah,
Um, yeah, so I was 48 years, and then I got really sad for teenage me.
yeah,
And there were things
yeah,
that I did in my
yeah,
teenage years. If I think about them now, I'm like, oh no, literally can't stop cringing at
Yeah.
things that happened 30 years ago.
Oh, yeah. So I try to be kind to myself, but I still beat myself up over things.
Yeah. I do
When
occasionally feel like maybe I'm not like a fraud, but
Yeah,
because I had such a late diagnosis and I'm still kind of coming to terms with it, because it was only what 15, 16 months ago. Um, Occasionally think, oh, I can't speak for autistic people because
yeah.
I forget that I lived with it. I may have only been diagnosed for 15, 16 months, but I lived with it for 48 years. So
Yeah.
I do know about it. I just didn't have a term to describe it.
Lots of adults are self-diagnosed and it's accepted in the community, partly because some people aren't able to face getting a diagnosis. It's a very arduous process. Or sometimes people can't get a diagnosis because they're on massive waiting lists. I was on a waiting list for 2 years. We're celebrating Neurodiversity Week. Get online and join in and find out more and celebrate your individuality.
You're still here. We'll be sending out another one of these again tomorrow.